Allen Lund Company has new offices in Ogden, Utah and Indianapolis, Indiana. Check allenlund.com to reach them.
OOIDA, representing America's truckers since 1973, presents Landline Now with your host, Mark Reddick.
Earlier this year, the Department of Labor instituted a new rule that defines when a worker can be considered an independent contractor. It's raised a number of questions and concerns among trucking companies who depend on contractors to do business. It's also spurred a number of lawsuits. Shang Li of the New Civil Liberties Alliance is representing a New Mexico-based trucking company that just filed a legal challenge. He explains why they're taking the new rule to court. Also on today's program, seasonal factors continued to impact the spot market. And while load post volume and rates were mostly down last week, Brent Hutto of Truckstop says a closer look at the data and a look at how bigger carriers are operating tells us something about the future. But first, the news with Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Mark. 1 year after Yellow filed for bankruptcy, the former mega carrier is trying to revive a lawsuit against the Teamsters. Yellow told a federal appeals court it plans to appeal a March decision that dismissed its case against the Teamsters. Yellow in part blames the Teamsters for its demise. The trucking company alleges that the Teamsters breached a collective bargaining agreement by blocking Yellow's restructuring plan and holding it hostage by demanding higher wages. Yellow is seeking at least $137 million in damages. The number of Class 8 trucks being sold in the U.S. is on the rebound. Ward's Intelligence reports that truck sales in July were up nearly 2% compared to a year earlier. That reverses 11 straight months of year-over-year declines. The July figure was up 18% compared to a month earlier. By brand, sales of Western Star trucks recorded the biggest jump of 30%. Freightliner sold the most Class 8 trucks, making up some 35% of all sales last month, even though sales dropped slightly from a year earlier. The supply chain in Canada faces a possible disruption starting next week. It's due to a looming railroad strike. CN Rail and CPKC both say they intend to lock out workers for the Teamsters Canada Rail Conference on August 22nd. Labor negotiations between the two sides have stalled. CN Rail has asked the Ministry of Labor to step in and mediate. There is a concern about the impact on supply chains moving forward. The Canadian Chamber of Commerce wrote to Prime Minister Justin Trudeau that a work stoppage at both major railways will leave Canadians with access to fewer goods and products, driving up prices and exacerbating affordability challenges. A Pennsylvania-based logistics company has agreed to pay monetary damages to a former worker who was fired following a cancer diagnosis. The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission said in a news release that Pilot Air Freight LLC will pay $400,000 to settle the disability discrimination lawsuit. The EEOC alleged in its lawsuit that in June 2019, Thomas Hunt informed his manager that he needed to request leave to see his doctor about some biopsy results. About 10 days later, Hunt was fired. Pilot claimed it was because he had less tenure than other employees and his position was eliminated. But in the months leading up to and following the firing, Pilot hired several employees who were not let go based on tenure and hired an employee in a position very similar to the one Hunt previously held and with a higher salary. That's a violation of the Americans with Disabilities Act, or ADA. Under the one-year consent decree resolving the lawsuit, Pilot will pay $400,000 in monetary damages to Hunt, train its employees on the ADA, and take other measures to ensure a similar incident doesn't happen again. The co-owner of a trucking company involved in a New Hampshire crash that killed 7 motorcyclists in 2019 has pleaded guilty to federal charges. Dunyadar Gasanov co-owned Westfield Transport, the company that employed Vladimir Zhukovsky, the man who struck and killed the 7 motorcyclists. The U.S. Attorney's Office for the District of Massachusetts says Gasanov pleaded guilty to 3 counts of making false statements to federal investigators. He faces up to 15 years in prison. Gasanov admitted to falsifying driving logs in order to evade federal regulations designed to ensure the safety of roadways and drivers. A co-defendant in the case has pleaded not guilty and is awaiting trial. Zhukovsky was acquitted on all counts against him in 2022. By the time August is over, Saia will have 6 brand new terminals to operate out of. The first has already opened. It's in Cheyenne, Wyoming, Saia's first terminal in the Cowboy State. Its second terminal in Wyoming isn't far behind. One in Casper is set to open up next week. Other locations to follow in the weeks to come include one each in Missoula and Butte, Montana, and two more in Rapid City and Watertown, South Dakota. Saia has been aggressive in its expansion plans in recent years. The company plans to open up to 21 new locations total in 2024. A South Dakota trucking company is folding and laying off dozens of workers. In a notice filed with the state labor department, A&A Express said it's closing its facility in Brandon and laying off 111 employees this week, the majority of which are truck drivers. The company said it's doing what it can to find work for those drivers at other companies. Distracted driving plays a role in more than half of all traffic crashes in Georgia. That's the big takeaway from a new report put out by the Governor's Office of Highway Safety and the Georgia Department of Public Health. In 2022, 53% of all motor vehicle traffic crashes in the state involved at least one confirmed or suspected distracted driver. Georgia enacted a hands-free law in 2018. In 2022, there were almost 49,000 distracted driving convictions. The American Truck Historical Society will honor 4 trailblazing pioneers by inducting them into the American Trucking and Industry Leader Hall of Fame in October. This year's honorees are 4 founders of 4 companies: Robert Young of ABF, John Ruin of Ruin Transportation, Marvin Rush of Rush Enterprises, and Fred Jones of Thermo King. The chair of the Hall of Fame, Tom Mullen, said all 4 pioneers have made a big impact on the industry. An induction ceremony will be held at the American Truck Historical Society headquarters in Kansas City, Missouri on October 23rd. And finally, Travel Centers of America is now accepting nominations for its Citizen Driver Award. This is the 15th year of the program that TA created to recognize professional drivers bringing a high level of respect to the profession. As part of the honor, Citizen Driver Award winners may select a TA, Petro Stopping Center, or TA Express location to be dedicated in their name, allowing their story to be continuously displayed for all travelers that pass through. That's in addition to a $5,000 prize and a $2,500 donation to each winner's organization of choice. To date, 44 citizen drivers have been awarded with the honor. Nominations for the 2025 award are being accepted through October 7th. That's Landline Now News for today. I'm Scott Thompson.
Thanks, Scott. You can write and post a review of the doctor who performed your DOT physical to be shared with your fellow truckers, or look up other reviews of a doctor through the OOIDA website, ooida.com. Just go to the main menu at the upper left corner of the page and under Resources, click on Certified Medical Examiner Review. Again, that's at the website, ooida.com. Starting Friday, Marty Ellis and OOIDA's tour truck, The Spirit of the American Trucker, will be at the Great Salt Lake Truck Show. That takes place at Thanksgiving Point Electric Park in Lehi, Utah. Stop in, say hi to Marty, and join OOIDA for a $10 discount. Registration is now open for OOIDA's Truck to Success Seminar, which runs for 3 days starting October 22nd in Blue Springs, Missouri. Truck to Success features trainers, both from OOIDA and elsewhere, who provide a comprehensive course in what it takes to become and succeed as an owner-operator. The deadline to register to attend in person is October 1st, and the deadline to register to attend by Zoom is October 21st. Participants who register before September 1st will receive $50 off, plus a 1-year membership to OOIDA for free. We'll have a link to more information at ooida.com. A reminder that the CVSA's annual Brake Safety Week will take place from August 25th through the 31st. During that week, inspectors across the U.S. and Canada will be checking all braking systems, with a special focus this year on brake linings and pads. For more information, go to that group's website, cvsa.org. Again, that website, cvsa.org. Next, Shang Li of the New Civil Liberties Alliance joins us for a discussion about a lawsuit over a new Department of Labor independent contractor rule, and Scott Thompson talks about seasonal factors in the spot market with Brent Hutto of Truckstop. I'm Mark Reddick, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Every year, 28 million people are trafficked globally. The Your Roads, Their Freedom campaign seeks to raise awareness in the transport industry. Truck and bus drivers, be vigilant on the roads. If you see something suspicious, text 233-733 or be free.
Truckdown.com. Whenever you have a breakdown, you need Truckdown.com. 24/7 access to 40,000 verified heavy-duty repair vendors nationwide. Truckdown verified, vendor qualified. Truckdown.com.
Firestone tires are for more of everything, with more durability for more miles and more confidence in your fleet. Firestone's tested tires help fleets save with value where it matters most. Learn more at bridgestonenationalfleet.com/4moremiles.
It's tested and proven. Burn 2.1% less fuel when you balance all wheel ends with Centromatic. Call 800-523-8473 to get the OOIDA discount.
Welcome back to Landline Now. We're going to dive now into an issue you're likely to hear a lot about in the years to come. You may recall that earlier this year, the Department of Labor instituted a new rule that defines when a worker can be considered an independent contractor. Two separate trucking companies have now filed challenges to that rule, seeking to have it rescinded. We're about to hear from one of the attorneys representing one of those trucking companies, New Mexico-based Colt & Joe Trucking. Sheng Li of the New Civil Liberties Alliance is going to walk us through the rule, its multi-factor economic reality test, the case that's going to start taking shape here very soon, and the landscape for a legal battle that is likely to play out over the months and maybe years to come.
Hi, this is Sheng Li. I'm litigation counsel at the New Civil Liberties Alliance. I'm the lead attorney in Colt & Joe v. Department of Labor, which is a challenge against the department's 2024 independent contractor regulation.
Well, first of all, thanks so much for speaking with us. This is a complicated case, and I know you're going to walk us through it, so we appreciate that. You mentioned the New Civil Liberties Alliance. I want to start there for those who may not be familiar with what you do there. Can you talk a little bit about the New Civil Liberties Alliance and, again, what you do?
Definitely. We're a nonprofit, nonpartisan law firm, and what we do is we represent small businesses and individuals against the government for government agencies for overreach, whether that's administrative adjudication or regulations. Basically, when kind of the big government goes after the little guys, we come in and we try to fight for the little guys against what we call the administrative state, which is when basically bureaucrats that are unelected coming in and trying to regulate or interfere with individual civil liberties.
Yeah, and I feel like the word overreach is going to be used more than a few times throughout our conversation here. Let's start at the start here with the origins of this lawsuit. We're, of course, talking about the Labor Department's new independent contractor rule, defines when a worker can be considered an independent contractor. The plaintiff here, your client as you mentioned there, is Colt & Joe Trucking. Can you just kind of walk us through the argument that you're making here, and specifically how this new rule stands to affect Colt & Joe?
Yeah, I think, if we just step back a little bit, we have to look at kind of where this comes from. And it all comes from a 1938 law called the Fair Labor Standards Act, which regulates labor relationships. So an employer has to pay minimum wage and overtime pay, that's where it comes from, to its employees under the Fair Labor Standards Act. But only if it's an employee, not if it's an independent contractor. So independent contractors can, work whatever many hours. So if you're a contractor and you work 25 hours for one employer or one company and 25 for another, you don't add that up and say, oh, it's more than 50 hours. So it's, you get overtime for that, because presumably the companies don't actually control your hours. You're setting those hours. So that's a distinction, employees under the law versus independent contractors. It makes a big difference. But the problem is the law itself doesn't define what those terms mean. And I'll just read from the law itself. It says the term employee means any individual employed by an employer. And then an employer is defined as any person acting directly or indirectly in the interest of an employer in relation to an employee. So you see, the definitions are circular. So you get a company like Colt & Joe here. It's a small company with a few employees. They have about 8 employees who are drivers, and they deliver cargo across state lines and so forth. But they also hire independent contractors when there's need. They usually have between 3 and 5. So they have different arrangements for how they treat their employees and independent contractors, depending on what what labor law requires. But it becomes really difficult if they can't figure out whether the folks they hire are employees or independent contractors. And that's where the crux of this lawsuit, and it's been like this for decades. The federal courts have, because the law is so unclear, the federal courts articulated kind of 6 factors you're supposed to consider, and those are control, whether the worker has an opportunity for profit, skill, permanence, I'm forgetting some here,
skill, initiative,
whether there's investment, and whether it's integral or integrated to the business. But the problem is, these tests, they don't really, the courts never really say what matters, why, and what factors are the most important. And in fact, the tests kind of switch between courts too. Sometimes it's 5, sometimes it's 6, sometimes it's 7 factors, and it just kind of creates a lot of confusion for companies. And in fact, the courts themselves can't figure it out. There was 2 cases in the mid 2000s involving Bell South, which hired a bunch of folks to do Hurricane Katrina repairs in Louisiana. And the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals, 2 different panels came to opposite conclusions about the folks that one panel of 3 judges said they were contractors. The other judge of 3 panels said they were employees. And if you're a small business, it just becomes really difficult to navigate that environment and figure out who's an employee and who's a contractor. And this is when we got to go back a little history here. In 2021, the Department of Labor, then under the Secretary Eugene Scalia, under the Trump administration, came up with a rule that tries to clarify the line and reduce confusion for companies and freelancers alike. And that rule says, well, we're actually going to focus on 2 of these factors. And those 2 we determine are the most important. And that's whether the worker has control over the key aspects of the work and whether the worker has an opportunity for profit or loss. And because these 2 factors, from a common sense perspective, really goes to the heart of whether you're in business for yourself as opposed to being someone else's employee. And I think, you can be skilled, for example, is another factor. You can be skilled or high-skilled or low-skilled. There are very many high-skilled employees, and there are low-skilled contractors. Permanence is another factor. You can be a contractor that has a long relationship with someone, and you can be an employee with a short relationship with someone. So that's why those factors may not be as important as control and opportunity. And that focus, the department also said, really aligns with what the courts have said, even though the department looked at decades of case law from the 70s to present, and said, well, actually, when the courts don't tell us exactly always. They don't always say what are the most important factors. But we looked at these cases, and every time the courts have found those 2 factors point at independent contractor, regardless of what all the other factors say, they found it to be an independent contractor. And whenever those 2 factors both said the guy was an employee, regardless of what the other factors say, they concluded that's the ultimate. The guy was ultimately an employee. So that's where we come in the 2021 rule, which set out a pretty clear standard for companies like Colton Joe that hire both employees and independent contractors.
Yeah, and
I hope that.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, it is a confusing situation that has been made more confusing, I think. As you kind of point out there, it was relatively clear-cut, in kind of differentiating between the 2. It is less so now.
That's right.
Yeah.
And as soon as the 2021 rule came out, it didn't even go into effect until there was a change in administration and the Biden administration tried to wipe it out. And the first time they tried to wipe it out, a federal court said it was the way they did it was unlawful because it didn't go through all the proper procedures, and reinstated the 2021 rule, which everyone, all the contractors, and by the way, all the freelancers and businesses wrote in comments supporting the 2021 rule, saying, "Hey, this is really clear. It helps us out a lot." So that rule went back into effect. But as soon as it went back into effect, the Biden administration said, "Well, we're gonna try to do it through the right procedures this time and replace it with a new rule, which came out this last January, the 2024 rule, which sort of returns it to a basically an I know it when I see it test.
Right.
It's a 7-factor test. It gets all the factors back. Then it adds a new factor that says the totality of circumstances. So you have to look at the whole picture. It won't tell you that the test won't tell you what's important, what's not important. But you got to look at the whole picture, and then you say contractor or employee. Well, if there's infinite number of factors, then there's really no factors, and a regulator or an enforcement person can just say, this is what's important to me, and that's how I'm going to make the decision. And a company that has to make a decision whether to classify someone as an employee or a contractor beforehand, it's left in a really tough spot. And so that's where we are. The 2024 rule does that, makes it super ambiguous and broad, and also skews a lot of the factors to sort of weigh in favor of employee classification. So one way to look at this is they look at the control factor, and traditionally, if you're a company and you hire contractors and you require them to follow safety rules, health standards, that sort of thing, that usually doesn't signal that weigh in favor of employee classification, because you would think anybody would require people to follow safety rules. But the department in its rule says actually that's a signal that might turn a contractor into an employee. And that's really important for the trucking industry here, because when Conjo hires an independent contractor to carry some cargo, they're going to tell those independent drivers, hey, you got to follow traffic rules, you got to follow Department of Transportation regulations, because we're responsible too. So we're going to make our contractors follow these things, but we don't want that, which is, I think, it's just like a reasonable, responsible business practice to do. We don't want that to somehow turn them into employees, and then we get hit with all these, all this liability and tax and benefit requirements.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to ask you, as we kind of focus this on the ground level and bringing it back to, again, trucking companies is obviously our focus here. With regard to this and your argument against the rule, you're going to essentially say that, what you said there, that this is all confusing. It complicates the situation for companies that are, hiring independent contractors. On the ground level, though, I mean, this has big implications for trucking companies, right? I mean, Colton Joe, I assume, is going to be looking at potential losses here as they try to navigate this environment. Is that going to be part of your argument here in that there is some sort of economic damage or, other damages to the company? Where does that fall in here?
Well, definitely there's going to be, losses here. For one, Colton Joe has to learn the regulation and then adapt their employment practices. That's a regulatory compliance cost. But more than that, it creates more risk and more regulatory burdens. For example, Colton Joe, they had at the beginning of the year, I think they had 4 contractors. They were hiring for some of this work. One of their relationships, just through the course of business, terminated, and they haven't replaced that contractor yet. Because to do it, they have to, learn these rules, jump through all these hoops. It's just, and as a result, somebody's not getting a contract. Colton Joe has one fewer person that they're hiring, but there's a trucker out there who could be getting jobs that's not getting a job and not getting paid. And this rule really has, effects on both sides of that relationship. Both the companies like Colton Joe are going to suffer because it's going to be more expensive for them to find workers, but freelancers are going to suffer too. And while we're representing, a company here, there's a couple other lawsuits out there.
Yeah.
I think one in Georgia, where the plaintiffs are actually freelancers, saying, hey, this is going to hurt our job opportunities. If you're going to make it harder for companies to hire contractors, then we're not going to be able to find work, and that's going to ultimately hurt our bottom line. Yeah, and there's another trucking company in Louisiana. I think the case mirrors yours pretty closely, right? Frizard's Transportation. Frizard, that's right. And they're in a slightly different posture in that I think they did this. I don't want to bore you too much with legalese, but they went for a preliminary injunction, and then they're appealing that. So it's not on the final merits, but they're at the Court of Appeals.
I think it is safe to say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think it's safe to say that this is not the first, second, third lawsuit that we're going to see against this independent contractor rule. I imagine there will be others coming down the pike here.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's quite a few, and I've actually kind of lost track of them. There's also one of the major ones is out in Texas, where the main group is this like consortium of tech companies, because this really affects gig economy companies. If you're driving for Uber or you're driving for DoorDash, are you an employee? Are you a contractor? It's a huge part of their business and can have $1 billion of implications for that industry.
Going to jump in here because we've got a lot more ground to cover with Shang Li of the New Civil Liberties Alliance, and we'll do that right after this short commercial break.
Today's rising costs affect everyone. Replace your harmonic damper with a genuine Vibertech TVD viscous damper to prevent costly repairs and downtime. Keep your money in your pocket and your truck on the road with Vibertech TVD. Recommended replacement at 500,000 miles or 15,000 hours.
Ready to make more money? Use a better load board. For a limited time, get 50% off Truckstop Load Board Pro. Just go to truckstop.com/go and enter promo code READY2024 when you purchase Load Board Pro.
Are you tired of the IRS following you around like a dark cloud? Call 888-557-4020 and get your life back.
Welcome back. When we last left you, we were chatting with Shang Li of the New Civil Liberties Alliance about the Department of Labor's new independent contractor rule, the subject of a new challenge launched by the New Mexico-based trucking company, Colt & Joe. We'll rejoin that conversation now and run down some of the unknowns at present time. What will the Department of Labor's argument be? What does precedent tell us? And if you're someone who feels your trucking company has been negatively impacted by the rule, let's jump back in now to our conversation with Shang Li. I'm not going to ask you to get into the head of Secretary Julie Su or the Department of Labor here, but I'm sure you've thought about this because you're preparing for this case here and obviously making an argument. But do you have an idea of how they're going to argue in favor of this rule? What their justification might be, how they plan to kind of push back against the assertions that you're making here, and what would you say to those things in response to them?
Yeah, I think they kind of outlined their argument in making the rule. Their justification for the rule really are two prongs. One is they said the 2021 rule that set out the two-factor framework or the emphasis on two factors is inconsistent with how courts have done this, inconsistent with the statute and inconsistent with judicial precedent. And that's because they point and say, well, you look at all these other cases out there in the past, and they've said, oh, it's 6 factors, and you're not supposed to you're supposed to consider the totality of circumstances. But I think that's not quite right because we're not saying the other factors don't matter. We're just saying the two, control and opportunity, are the most important, and that's again backed up by common sense. When you ask somebody, hey, are you in business for yourself? The first thing that comes to mind isn't, hey, is this guy skilled or not? There are highly skilled doctors and engineers who work for companies with 401k plans and are classically trained as employees, whereas there are relatively lowly skilled delivery drivers who everyone would agree would be a contractor. So I think that argument that this is somehow inconsistent with the law, the previous law, doesn't hold water because, for one, none of those other cases actually say you can't focus on particular factors, and some of them, including Supreme Court cases, do focus on the control and opportunity factors. So I think we're the ones on the side of consistency with the law. And the other argument that the department in their rulemaking has made is that the 2024 rule, they say, actually reduces confusion somehow, which I think beggars belief, because I would think a 2-factor test is less complicated and less confusing to apply than a 7-factor test where you have to weigh everything.
Yeah.
So that I don't think really is very persuasive, particularly because the folks who have to navigate the test, the contractors and the business community, supported the 2021 rule, and they all commented to object to the 2024 rule. So if it's so clear and reduces confusion, you would think the folks who have to deal with it on a day-to-day basis would support it instead of object to it. And sort of the argument that they make in response to that is that, well, there's been courts that say that have declined to apply. There's one court in New Hampshire that declined to apply the 2024 rule because it thought it was uncertain. But if you actually look at that New Hampshire decision, it said that tried to apply the 2021 rule and said it was uncertain. If you look at that decision, the court actually said, well, I think the 2021 rule is uncertain because the department is actively trying to undermine it, right? In 2022, the department already announced that it was going to try to replace the rule. So I think the department can't, this is kind of very like bootstrapping. They can't create confusion by flip-flopping and then say, look at this confusion. This confusion means we get authority to issue a new rule that returns it to the prior state. So that is its main, regulatory certainty argument. I don't think it's very strong.
I don't want to get too far into the weeds here with legalese and the court process and all that, but you filed a motion for summary judgment in a New Mexico federal district court, right?
Yep.
Briefly, can you walk us through the process? Because to me, and again, correct me if I'm wrong here, but this process is probably going to take months, if not years, right? This is going to be drawn out for quite a while, but just kind of walk me through what happens next.
Yeah, so we're in summary judgment briefing. We just filed our opening brief, and then the government has about a month to respond to that. Then we have a month to respond to the government, and then the government has one more, gets the last word, one more. So there's each side gets 2 rounds, and they're about 3 weeks, 4 weeks apart. So briefing will conclude sometime in the fall, and then we're in the hands of the district court, depending on when the court decides to issue a decision on the case. There's no real deadline on that. I will say this, because there's 3 or 4 of these lawsuits around the country. They might race each other, or sometimes the judges will wait to see what the other districts will say.
Right.
So we're not really sure who will go first. The first one filed is the one out of Texas, but just because you're filed a couple months early doesn't mean your decision will necessarily come out first. It all depends on kind of how the case proceeds and the particular court, how busy is that particular court, and how they get to you. But we expect we might see the first set of decisions in these cases. We don't know if it'll be ours or maybe someone else's. Probably sometime next year. But of course, this is just at the district court stage. So there's a rule like this is likely to get appealed, and then you go through the appeal process, which could take more months than a year or more. So again, this is likely not to be resolved in the immediate time frame.
Well, let me ask you this, and I'm not trying to inundate you with emails or requests or whatever, but I imagine there will be people out there listening to this right now, carriers who, again, utilize independent contractors to do their business, and are probably maybe feeling the same confusion that Colton Joe has, and I imagine there are lots out there. If they're listening to this, should they reach out to someone like your alliance? Is there something they should or could be doing to maybe help their case, or is that maybe a little bit too much to ask?
We already filed a lawsuit. It's probably too late to join this one, but you can always file different lawsuits in different places, and their strategies are for splitting the circuits. In the whole, I won't get into too much of the details, but there are strategies of trying to put different lawsuits in different jurisdictions to get a split, to get maybe the Supreme Court to pay attention. Yeah,
and again, I think that's a very real possibility at some point down the line here as we look at all of this, because as I said, we've got 2 cases right now from trucking companies against this. You mentioned the other ones that are out there right now as well. I feel like there are going to be a number of others that come down the line here. As we're kind of closing things out here, again, for those out there who are doing business with independent contractors, that they depend on them to, obviously do their work and get their job done. Do you have any, advice? Again, you've studied this obviously thoroughly, this new rule here. Do you have any advice for people out there? Anything they could be doing differently? Or I'm just trying to find some sort of way to lessen the confusion for everybody out there, because it is confusing. It's very confusing, and it's frustrating for a lot of people, and I'm sure you've heard that as well. Just advice for people, what would you say to them?
I think, because I guess I don't want to give too much advice because I don't want people to rely on it.
Yeah, I got
because
you.
the department, the department's rule is really, we haven't really seen them go after anybody yet with this new 7-factor kind of totality test. So because of that, I can't really say how they will do it, and they might do it inconsistently. Sometimes they'll go really aggressively, other times they'll be less so, and that's kind of part of the unpredictability of all this. Ultimately, I think, I hope that one of these cases will ultimately succeed and we can return to a 2-factor framework that's a lot easier to deal with. In the meantime, I do think it is, you're taking a little risk if you hire somebody who, there are some times where it's obviously a contractor, so I think it's very safe.
Sure.
There's other times where it's obviously an employee. But if you're in that gray area, especially in sort of the gig economy, these areas where you don't have a lot of prior precedent, then I think that it is a little risky, and I wouldn't be surprised if some companies and some will decline to make some hiring this way, and we've seen this in fact in California's experience where when they passed or enacted the AB5 law, which makes it really hard to hire independent contractors. You saw media companies with their freelance journalists say, well, we're just not going to hire you as a freelance writer if you live in California. If you live across the state in Nevada, great, we'll give you a contract. But if you live in California, not so much. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's exactly what's happening today and now across the country.
In best case scenario here, the court, one of these courts that are looking at this is essentially going to say, we're going to toss it out. Is that the best case scenario here?
That's right.
Yeah.
And if here only one really. Well, it depends on. But I think if one of these cases wins, I think the right remedy is to toss the entire rule out. So all there needs to be is a single court out of these 3 or 4 lawsuits to stop the rule, and it should, if the judge is, I think, applying the law correctly, knock the rule out nationwide. Now, of course, there's obviously appeals, so other things can happen.
Right.
But a single victory should at least be a very good step forward and provide some clarity for regulated companies.
Yeah, clarity would be nice if we can get there again to clear up some of this confusion here, because we're all confused by it.
And ultimately, I mean, you can make a strong case. This is really a job for Congress to fix. They wrote this statute and they defined employee and employer in a very circular manner that makes it. The courts have created this silly 6 or 7 factor test, but they're working with the words they have on the page, and those words are not very good. So that I don't know how functional Congress is, but that could be a potential way of moving forward as well.
Yeah. Well, and it just, as you were talking there, it kind of raised this whole Loper-Bright decision as well. I'm wondering, does that factor in here at some point too with federal agencies?
Oh, certainly. Yeah. Certainly. The department, it takes away a powerful tool in the department's argument arsenal.
Yeah.
Of they can't say, hey, you have to defer to our. They can't say, we're the Department of Labor. We know what's an employee. Therefore, you defer to us when we say this is an employee versus that. That's no longer the law of the land. Now the courts have to independently assess the text on the page, and the text just isn't very helpful. And when the text isn't very helpful, I think what you need to do is just give it its ordinary common sense meaning of what an employee is, and that ordinary common sense meaning of how ordinary people understand an employee from since the 1930s to now. Really, those 2 factors control an opportunity for profit. If you're if you're doing something and you control the work, when you work, how you work, what tools you use, whether you hired others, and you have an opportunity for profit, you're not being paid, by the hour or by a salary, but rather you're being paid by based on profits minus your expenses. Then I think an ordinary person would see that as an independent contractor, not an employee.
Sheng, hey, as I said, thank you so much for bringing clarity to this issue, and I'm sure we have not heard the last of it, and hopefully we'll talk to you again soon when some of this gets resolved a little bit.
I look forward to it. Thank you.
Our thanks once again to Sheng Li for running us through what is a complicated case during complicated times. If you're interested in reaching out to the New Civil Liberties Alliance about this issue, you can find them online at nclalegal.org. And with that, we'll take a break, but hang tight. There's more Landline Now coming up right after this.
Penske owns and operates some of the best-maintained vehicles on the planet. Our used trucks come with a 5-year maintenance report and pre-sale inspection. So if you're in the market for a top-quality pre-owned truck, look no further. Search our inventory today at PenskeUsedTrucks.com.
Control your toll costs and eliminate tolling headaches with Prepass Tolls. Prepass Tolls means toll volume discounts. Just one invoice for all tolls and fewer violations. Call 877-878-5970 or go to prepass.com.
Since you started, what you've loved about trucking is the freedom. Heading out on your favorite route, a good driving song, and thinking about truck insurance. Well, maybe not that last one. That's why we're here. At OOIDA, we have a full range of truck insurance products, expert advice, and great customer service, helping you get the right coverage for your operation. Go to OOIDA.com, because your job is to drive. Our job is to help with everything else.
Landline Now, welcome back. If you're hauling freight and running your own business, you need to keep track of some basic facts and figures that can determine whether you succeed or fail. And that includes finding the freight and how much money you can make hauling it. Today, Landline Now's Scott Thompson will bring us some of that information and get some insight as to why things are happening with the folks from Truckstop.com. Here's Scott now with a report.
Thanks, Mark, and hello to Brent Hutto of Truckstop. Brent, how you doing?
Man, Scott, I'm doing great. It's a fantastic summer. Been having a good time. I've been able to take a little time off with my family. I hope that you have, and truckers out there. But although it's a difficult market right now, so I know taking time off is not the greatest thing in the world right now for trucking, but it's been a good summer.
Yeah, it has, and it's gone quick as they often do. Let's talk about some of the conditions that truck drivers are facing out there. You kind of talked about it a little bit. I've been looking at kind of the most recent numbers here, courtesy of Truckstop. It's looking like mostly more of the same on the spot market here. What are you seeing out there right now, though?
Yeah, I appreciate you putting it that way, because if you're sitting in the middle of the marketplace, it looks like more of the same. I get to see some really cool data because of the marketplace. You know, we see all these hundreds of thousands of people working back and forth and moving freight, so we get to see some of the indicators of what's going on. So my sort of theme this week is a little bit of hope. I'm kind of hopeful. My theme song is by Avril Lavigne, Keep Holding On, because trucking kind of keeps holding on, looking for signs. Well, there's been some signs, and I'm gonna talk about that right at the end of some signs in this. But if you just look at the marketplace, it's kind of been holding along all along. And then if you even look at, like, for instance, available freight going on stock right now in the marketplace, it's decreased over the last 3 weeks. And here's what I want to tell the truckers out there. Don't be too concerned about that. The spot market decreases after July 4th every year, because July 4th is a peak period. Then it comes down for about 3 or 4 weeks. Then it comes back up going into the holiday period. So don't be too concerned if you don't see as many loads available in the marketplace, because we've seen them in the marketplace. It's down about 12% over the normal. So, but don't be too concerned, because it's normal for the marketplace. Rates kind of this is where the issue is. We've just had a rate recession, and rates kind of dropped down to $228 overall in the marketplace. But here's my thing to truckers on this. That is an average rate among the whole spot market. If you look at van, it was $1.94. If you look at flatbed, it was $2.34. If you look at reefer, it was $2.38. These are averages in a lane at a certain period of time over an entire marketplace. The thing I say to truckers all the time, Scott, is this. Look at that lane. Look at what's running presently in that lane. Do you have any negotiation ability? Understand the need of what's going on for that mover of that freight on that one piece of freight, because every piece of freight in the spot market, for these small owner-operators, your members and our customers, every one of them is independent. So you can negotiate really well on them. So always remember how to negotiate, but you got to use it with data, and that's why I love being on the program to talk about the data in the marketplace. Also, here's another thing that gives me a little bit of hope. So is the outbound tender reject index, which is another company's data, but we use it every day because it mirrors the spot market where these owner operators, where the owner operators are in their market. So, but over the last 4 to 5 weeks, I've seen stability in that, where it's moved from the low 4s to the high 4s, and 4% of that contract freight being rejected on the contract that was agreed to being hauled on. But the closer it moves to 5, the better health we have in our market.
You talked about kind of areas where there is money to be made. And if we're looking for bright spots, if we're looking for regions and lanes that are hot right now, it looks like the southern part of the U.S. continues to be the place to look, right?
For sure it does, man. No doubt. Southeast has been hot just in general the last while. And I'll tell you, most of that is driven by this. And so I went and I looked at load availability, I looked at rates overall for the nation, and I look at the areas of the country, and now look by kind of like mode. What's van doing? What's flatbed doing? What's reefer doing? Well, dry van and reefer are kind of negative year over year. I think van was about 16% load availability less, and reefer was, let me tell you real quick, I'll tell you what reefer was. Reefer was over year, actually, let's see, stand by, is about a percent, nope, that's not true. It's about 8% low. So about 16% and 8% low, but flatbed is up year over year in availability. It's 12% up. So it doesn't surprise me that the Southeast, which is very industrial sort of focused, is up in overall in availability, because flatbed has continued to kind of show strength, where dry van for the spot market has gone down. Now, let me explain that really quick, because I want to make sure the owner operators and small carriers know this. Dry van has gone down because the contract marketplace, which is populated predominantly by dry van freight, because these are the midsize and super large haulers, carriers in the marketplace. They predominantly haul dry van freight, and so you got to compete with that. Well, most of that freight's being moved by those carriers, because there's very little being rejected and moved into the spot market. So not surprised by that. But overall, so you just look at those sort of things, that there are certain areas of the country are stronger, and then specifically in that, as you and I have talked about the last several times that we've talked, is that there's pockets. Anything out of Texas continues to be strong. Stuff from the West Coast continues to be strong right now because of the challenge with West Coast regulations and things like that. But a lot of sort of the power lanes, just in the Southeast to anywhere out, have been very strong. So look in those regions, because you always want to be in a market that's growing, or at least showing some growth, so in order to be able to get the best out of it.
Let's circle back to your optimism. We obviously want to be optimistic. We want to be realistic too, though.
Absolutely.
With that in mind, as we continue to look for light at the end of this long tunnel that we've been traveling down, it may not feel like it, but we are seeing some slow but steady progress when it comes to all of this. And you kind of alluded to it earlier. I'll let you run with that and kind of talk about what you're seeing there.
Well, I appreciate you letting me kind of bring the good news right, the gift at the end. Okay, so I'm very lucky to be able to look at all parts of the market. I look at not just brokers and carriers, and I look at also shippers, what's going on in the marketplace, but I look at a lot of these big companies that are out there, that because they got big, they got teams of people to do analysis on the market and stuff. And so yes, Truckstop has this very unique data on the market, but these big players do a lot of analysis too. And when you're publicly traded, you're beholden to a board and you've got to report. Well, a lot of these big players in the market I want to start with one thing, saying they're getting back to profitability first and foremost by cutting operational costs. So if you got a small operation out there, always pay attention to cost, because everybody else does, and you should too. So, but C.H. Robinson, biggest mover of freight in the marketplace. They don't own a truck, but the biggest mover. And also Landstar, and also Werner, and also Knight Swift, and also Heartland are all saying things about they're seeing opportunity for growth over the next, not 6 months, because if somebody says 6 months, that means, we don't really know. Right. They say 3 months, and then they've got some optimism, because these big companies, they're beholden to their words, to their board, and to their shareholders. And so you look for what are they saying about things, that market, the market inflection. Derek Warner says market inflection. Knight Swift says see signs of market stabilization. Landstar says see stabilizing trends. But here's where the rubber meets the road, is in the Truckstop data, because we see it faster than anybody else, because we've got this live marketplace data that comes from the Truckstop carriers and the brokers working together. So we see this back and forth. And this is what's been interesting, because we're seeing this trend. Even though loads were down, bringing the 2024, right, the market where we're sitting in today, back to 2023 levels, and given that spot loads generally go by 1% or more percent a year, this says maybe the market's soft. But hold on. This comes straight from our chief economist, Noah Perry. He said, that said, this is where it's important, rates were up, bringing 2024 above 2023. And this is where it's great, because you want to see a trend for the fourth consecutive week. In the spot market, we don't look at week over week. We look at, is it 3 or 4 weeks in a row to establish a positive trend? So that's where the hope is. We're seeing things trending that way. Now, it may go down 1 week and then come back up for 3 more weeks. So that's how it goes up in the spot market. And Scott, that's why we at Truckstop are a little more hopeful for the carriers out there in order for them to create more profit.
Yeah. Things are shifting. It doesn't feel like it out there, I know, a lot of the time. But we are getting there, and at some point here, we're going to see a pretty noticeable shift. Brent, we always appreciate it. Always appreciate your perspective. Great information as always, and hopefully we're helping people out there navigate these rocky times. Thanks so much. We'll talk to you again soon.
Pleasure being on. Thank you.
Our thanks to Brent Hutto of Truckstop. Mark, back to you.
Thanks, Scott. That's our program for today. I'm Mark Rettig, and this is Landline Now.
Thanks for listening. Be sure to like and subscribe. If you want more content, go to landline.media to get updated news, information, and archived editions of our show. Once again, that's landline.media.
Capital Reman is your leading source for quality remanufactured engines and components. Capital Reman stands ready to serve all OOIDA members to help reduce costly engine repairs or replacement. Visit capitalreman.com today and use code OOIDA10 to save.
ULSD is hurting your engine. Fight back with Howe's Diesel Defender. Get the most powerful cleaning and maximum lubricity to protect and extend the life of your entire system. At a guaranteed increase in fuel economy, and you can't go wrong with Howe's.
Dispatch, I picked up that load of steel, so I'm ready to roll.
Sounds good. Remember, we're getting paid by weight, so make sure to use a CAT scale.
I wouldn't weigh anywhere else.
Forget miss accuracy when you're truck on a CAT scale.
I'm a dad,
a son,
a husband,
wife.
I'm a writer,
photographer.
I farm.
I'm a veteran.
I love old cars, fishing,
my kids,
chrome, and I am
a professional truck driver.
And together we are OOIDA.
OOIDA was founded by truckers to stand up and speak on behalf of truckers. We've done that by combining the individual voices of our members into a single, powerful voice. Protecting your interests, defending your rights.
Join us!
Make your voice heard. Join OOIDA, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association. Call 1-800-444-5791 or visit OOIDA.com.